Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
When my wife and I bought our house in this quiet suburban neighborhood, we thought we were living the American dream. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed hedges, and kids played freely on lush green lawns. Our neighbors seemed friendly, always ready with a wave and a smile. The HOA promised a well-maintained community, and we eagerly signed on the dotted line, envisioning years of peaceful living ahead. But man, were we in for a rude awakening. It didn't take long for the cracks in our suburban paradise to start showing. What we thought was a well-oiled machine turned out to be a rusty, creaking contraption held together by red tape and petty power trips. Our HOA, as we soon discovered, was less interested in maintaining the community and more focused on flexing its bureaucratic muscles. The first few months were fine. We settled in, unpacked our boxes, and started to make the place our own. We even attended a couple of HOA meetings, thinking we'd be good, involved residents. Looking back, I wish we'd stayed home and watched paint dry instead. It would have been more productive and far less infuriating. It all started with that damn landscaping easement. 10 to 12 feet of our property, stretching back from the road, was supposed to be maintained by the HOA. We'd read the bylaws and covenants carefully before moving in, making sure we understood our responsibilities. According to those documents, the HOA was supposed to take care of that strip of land, using our dues to keep it in good shape. For the first few months, we didn't think much of it. Sure, the landscapers only seemed to come by to trim the bushes, but we figured they had some sort of schedule for the rest of the area. Maybe they did the brush clearing annually or something. We tried to be patient and understanding. I remember standing at our kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the landscaping crew arrive. They'd pull up in their truck, unload their equipment, and get to work on the bushes lining the easement. It was always the same routine: trim, shape, clean up, and leave. I'd wave to them sometimes, and they'd nod back, focused on their task. "Honey," I said to my wife one morning, "don't you think it's odd they never touch anything beyond those front bushes?" She shrugged, busy packing our kids' lunches. "Maybe they're waiting for the right season. For the other plants or something?" I nodded, trying to convince myself. After all, landscaping wasn't my forte. For all I knew, there could be a perfectly good reason for their selective attention. As the weeks turned into months, we kept expecting to see more comprehensive work being done. Every time the landscaping truck pulled up, I'd think, this is it. Today they'll tackle the whole easement. But it never happened. We'd discuss it over dinner sometimes, speculating about the HOA's maintenance plans. Maybe they do a big cleanup in the spring? I'd suggest. Or perhaps they're saving up for a major overhaul of the whole area. Our neighbors didn't seem concerned, so we tried not to be either. We were new here, after all. Who were we to question how things had always been done? So we waited, and we watched, and we tried to be patient. After all, good things come to those who wait, right? If only we'd known then what we know now, we might not have been so understanding. But as the months dragged on, that patience wore thin. The bushes they did tend to seem to die from overzealous pruning, only to be replaced and killed again. Meanwhile, the rest of the easement area became a jungle. Ivy crept across the ground, fallen tree limbs littered the area, and invasive bushes sprouted up everywhere. The worst part was the kudzu. That stuff grew like it was on steroids, choking out everything in its path. "Honey, did you see that rat run across the yard?" my wife asked one evening as we sat on our porch. I sighed, nodding. "Yeah, I've been seeing more and more of them lately. I think they're coming from that overgrown mess in the easement." It wasn't just rats, either. We started spotting snakes slithering through the tall grass, and then came the foxes. Now, I'm all for wildlife, but when you've got kids and dogs, the last thing you want is a bunch of potentially rabid animals hanging around your yard. "We need to do something about this," I told my wife. "I'm going to email the HOA president." That's when I met the bane of my existence, our HOA president, Mr. Thompson. I drafted a polite, professional email explaining the situation and requesting that the HOA fulfill its obligations as outlined in the bylaws. His response was infuriating. "Dear homeowner," it read, "we appreciate your concern for the community's appearance. However, our current budget constraints make it difficult to address every area of landscaping. We'll take your comments under advisement for future planning." It was a complete cop-out. I tried following up, providing specific references to the bylaws and covenants, But Mr. Thompson's responses became increasingly evasive. Eventually, he stopped responding altogether. Frustrated, I decided to bring it up at the next HOA meeting. As I stood up to speak, Mr. Thompson cut me off. "We'll be sticking to the agenda items listed," he said firmly. "Any other business can be submitted in writing for consideration at a later date." I looked around the room, hoping to find some support from my neighbors. Most avoided eye contact, but I noticed one woman, Belinda from down the street, nodding in agreement with me. After the meeting, she approached me. "I've been dealing with the same issue," Belinda confided. "I've given up trying to get them to do anything about it. It's not worth the stress." But I couldn't let it go. This was my property, my home, and I was paying good money in HOA dues for services that weren't being provided. The situation was becoming unbearable. One Saturday morning, I was out in the yard with my kids when my son Jack came running up to me, his eyes wide with fear. "Dad, I saw a huge snake by the fence." I hurried over to where he was pointing, and sure enough, there was a thick, dark snake slithering through the overgrown grass of the easement. "All right, kids, inside now," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. That was the last straw. I marched back into the house and called a surveyor. "I need my property lines clearly marked," I told them, "as soon as possible." While I waited for the surveyor, I reached out to a local attorney who specialized in property disputes. "I'm not looking to sue anyone," I explained during our consultation. "I just want to know my rights and options." The attorney listened patiently as I laid out the whole sorry situation. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Well, you've certainly got a case here. The HOA is clearly in breach of their own bylaws. We could potentially file a lawsuit to force them to fulfill their obligations." I winced at the thought of the legal fees, but what choice did I have? "What about if I just clear the land myself?" I asked. He shook his head. "I wouldn't recommend that. Even though it's your property, the easement complicates things. You could potentially open yourself up to liability, especially if you damage any trees or underground utilities." Great! So I was stuck between a rock and a hard place, or more accurately, between an overgrown mess and a stubborn HOA president. The day the surveyor came was eye-opening. As he marked out the property lines, I realized just how much of our yard was being consumed by this neglected easement. Nearly 90 square feet of our property was essentially unusable. "This is ridiculous," I muttered as I stood at the edge of our manicured lawn, looking out at the wild tangle of vegetation beyond. "We can't even use our own backyard without worrying about what might be lurking in there." My wife came out to join me, wrapping her arm around my waist. "What are we going to do?" she asked. I sighed heavily. "I'm going to rope off the easement area for now. At least that way the kids will know where not to go. Then I guess we'll have to pursue this legally." The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. I put up bright yellow caution tape along the edge of the easement, which looked terrible but at least marked a clear boundary. I gathered all our documentation, copies of the bylaws, our correspondence with the HOA, photos of the overgrown area, and even statements from neighbors who were experiencing similar issues. Through it all, Mr. Thompson and the rest of the HOA board remained frustratingly silent. I sent registered letters demanding action, but they went unanswered. It was like shouting into a void. The situation was taking a toll on our family life. Our backyard, once a place of relaxation and fun, had become a source of stress and anxiety. The kids couldn't play freely, always having to be vigilant about staying away from the jungle, as they'd taken to calling it. Our dog, usually content to lounge in the sun, now spent most of his time indoors, too nervous to venture out where he might encounter a fox or snake. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table picking at our food, my daughter Lily asked, "Dad, why can't we just move?" I hate it here. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. We bought this house with such high hopes, imagining years of happy memories. Now, barely 2 years in, we were considering abandoning it all because of an incompetent HOA and a patch of overgrown land. "We're not going to move," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We're going to fight this. This is our home, and we have a right to enjoy all of it." But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I found my resolve wavering. The legal process was slow and expensive. Our attorney was doing his best, but the HOA's lawyers were masters of delay and obfuscation. Every small victory felt hollow as the vegetation continued to grow unchecked. The final straw came on a warm summer evening. We were having a barbecue in the backyard, trying to make the best of the situation, when we heard a commotion from the easement area. To our horror, we saw our dog Buddy in a tussle with a fox, right at the edge of the overgrown area. I ran towards them, shouting and waving my arms to scare off the fox. Buddy came limping back, bleeding from several bites. As I scooped him up to rush him to the emergency vet, I could feel my blood boiling. This wasn't just about property values or aesthetics anymore. This was about the safety of my family and our pets. Something had to give. As I sat in the vet's office, waiting to hear about Buddy's condition, I made a decision. I was done playing nice. I was done with polite emails and professional courtesy. If the HOA wouldn't do their job, then I'd make sure everyone knew about it. I started a Facebook group for disgruntled homeowners in our community. I put up signs in my yard detailing the HOA's neglect. I even considered going to the local news, though my wife talked me out of that one. The HOA's response was swift and predictable. They sent us a violation notice for the signs, threatening fines if we didn't remove them. But I was beyond caring about their petty rules at this point. As I write this, we're still locked in this ridiculous battle. The easement is still overgrown, the HOA is still neglectful, and our once peaceful home feels more like a war zone. I don't know how this will end, but I do know one thing. I'll never again take the words Homeowners Association lightly. Every day, I look out at that tangled mess of vegetation and feel my blood pressure rise. It's not just about the 90 square feet of unusable land anymore. It's about principle. It's about fairness. It's about standing up to bureaucratic bullies who think they can ignore their responsibilities. Will we win this fight? I honestly don't know, but I do know that I'm not giving up. This is our home, damn it, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make it livable again, even if that means going to war with our own HOA. You're probably paying the same dues as everyone else in the neighborhood, even if they don't live along the easement. So you're actually paying dues for everything your HOA does. Even though there's an easement, it's still your property. If the HOA isn't being responsive, go ahead and sue them or do the cleanup yourself. The HOA has no right to complain. Save your receipts, try to get reimbursed. Oh, and run for the board. So you're doing the right things, attorney, etc. My one piece of advice is to get whatever documentation you get from the HOA about budget and go through it with a fine-tooth comb. I'm sure the president is a jackass. That aside, this is what you see when HOA dues are either being misdirected, e.g. my cousin has an amazing landscaping company, or aren't high enough to cover commitments and they're robbing Peter to pay Paul. The HOA letting that area deteriorate along a city road is potentially violating health and building codes. Also, contacting your city or county health department and building department may provide some additional leverage for you and would not incur the costs of hiring your own lawyer. If that sign is to the entry of your development, that area likely falls inside of the city road right-of-way and has public utilities buried there which are made harder to access by the overgrowth if a future repair needs to be done there. HOAs exist both as a contract between residents and to the city. Leverage the city to force the HOA to uphold its obligations to them regarding maintenance of HOA-controlled land.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.